So you're thinking about making a move to Washington, D.C., and you've probably heard that D.C. is broken down into 4 different quadrants: Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, and Southeast. And you want to know what the differences are between these 4 quadrants. Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video, and we're going to get after it right now. If this is your first time to the channel and you want to learn every single thing about living in the DC metro area, you've come to the right place. My name is Bashir. Our team gets calls and emails every single day from people just like you looking to make a move to the Washington, DC area and surrounding suburbs. So whether you're moving in 10 or 100 days, feel free to give us a call, text, or email, or schedule a Zoom call. We'd love to meet you in person and make that move to the DC area as smooth as possible. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about these 4 quadrants. And like I said, DC is made up of 4 different quadrants: Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, and Southeast. And a lot of times when people are going to make that purchase and buy that first or second or third home, I often hear things like, oh, I don't want to live in Northwest, or I don't want to live in Southwest, or whatever the quadrant is. And here's one key thing to keep in mind. Northwest and Southeast and Southwest and Northeast, they're not neighborhoods in and of itself. They're just quadrants on a map. And within these quadrants, you have different neighborhoods. So in Northwest, you might have 10, 15, 20 different neighborhoods. The same as Southeast. You might have 10, 20 different neighborhoods in the same quadrant. Now, the key thing is this. Within those quadrants, those 10 neighborhoods, a lot of them can differ, and they could differ quite drastically from things like amenities, walkability, accessibility to transportation, everything you can think of, schools, everything you can think of that makes up a neighborhood, they differ, right? Green spaces, for example. It's not as simple as saying, oh, I don't want to live in a certain quadrant. You have to analyze the different neighborhoods and see what neighborhood matches your goals and personality, right? Because if you were a young professional and you wanted to live in a neighborhood that was very centrally located and had a lot of bars and restaurants, and you just want that city life, right? You might not want to pick a neighborhood that's just made up of tree-lined streets and single-family homes, and it's not as close to different amenities, right? Nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't match with your lifestyle. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to hop in the map, and I'm going to show you these different neighborhoods in these different quadrants. And I'm just going to briefly go over these neighborhoods so you can see which one of these neighborhoods works best for you and your lifestyle. Let's hop into the map. We're in the map of DC. As you see these red lines over here, this is the DC border, which borders Maryland. And over here, this is the border that borders Virginia. But we're going to be focusing right here. This is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to compare. I'm just going to go in each quadrant. We're going to start off with Northwest Washington, which is right here. And I'm going to pick out 2 to 4 different neighborhoods in Northwest that are drastically different as far as what they have to offer and the overall vibe of the neighborhood. And I'll show you why it's very important to actually study each individual neighborhood versus assuming that every neighborhood in Northwest or Northeast is the same. So let's do this. Let me zoom this out, or zoom it in, I should say. Okay, so let me pick out 2 different neighborhoods. So we're here. This corner is in the upper Northwest section of DC. All these neighborhoods, these are all upper Northwest. Let's compare Palisades with, come on, buddy, I can't rate the app right now. I'm busy. Maybe next time. Let's rate this is messing up my flow. Let's compare Palisades with a neighborhood like Adams Morgan, for example. Even though these 2 neighborhoods are in Northwest, they're 2 drastically different neighborhoods. Let's talk about Palisades. Palisades is one of those neighborhoods that's very, very prestigious. The average home price is well in the millions. Well over $1 million. So it's going to fall right around 1.3, even $1.4 million, possibly. Very prestigious neighborhood. You see a lot of single family homes in this neighborhood on, decent sized lots, tree lined streets. They have excellent schools. If you wanted to live in this neighborhood, you're going to have to spend $1 to get into the Palisades, right? And there's not a lot of inventory in Palisades at this time. People want to be in this neighborhood because of things like schools and things like that. So if we compare that to a neighborhood like Adams Morgan, the demographic in Adams Morgan is a bit different, right? Because Adams Morgan is where, you find a lot of young professionals. And and let me say this, Palisades, it's not a very walkable neighborhood, right? It's not isolated. It's still in DC. It's not in the suburbs of Maryland or Virginia, but it's not the most walkable neighborhood, right? So if you compare that with Adams Morgan, very vibrant neighborhood, a lot of young professionals are attracted to this neighborhood. As we can see here, there are multiple metro stops in the neighborhood. So we have one right there, Adams Morgan Metro. We have another one over here and another one over. This is a bit further away, but it's quite accessible. Comparing that to Palisades, you don't see any metro stops close by. And the metro stops are just the train stations. The closest one is actually right over here, which is the Tenleytown Metro, right? So not as close as the one in Adams Morgan, which is right here. That just tells you a lot. And I'm pretty sure the walk score for Adams Morgan is definitely in the 90s, while Palisades has a walk score of only 50. I'm pretty sure the people who move there, they didn't move there for a walk score, right? So they probably not a big deal for a lot of the families who live in the Palisades versus Adams Morgan. People might live here because they don't want to own a car. They don't want to have to drive everywhere. They just pick Adams Morgan because it's a very walkable neighborhood, very vibrant. A lot of things are going on, especially on 18th Street. A lot of diverse restaurants in Adams Morgan. It's just two drastically different neighborhoods, even though they're in the same quadrant in Northwest. This is why it's very important when you're picking where to live in DC, you don't just go based off whether it's located in Northeast or Northwest, but you actually look into the individual neighborhoods and research the individual neighborhoods so you know what you're signing up for. Because the last thing you want to do is buy a home or a condo in the wrong neighborhood. And when I say wrong neighborhood, I don't mean that the neighborhood itself is bad. It just means it's not congruent with your lifestyle and your expectations. Let's move on to two different neighborhoods. Let's compare Shaw right here at the bottom to 16th Street Heights. Now, these two neighborhoods, again, they're in the Northwest quadrant of DC. And the difference, again, 16th Street Heights, it gives you that suburban feel. The demographic that's in 16th Street Heights are families and older people who've lived in their homes for 2-3 decades. 16th Street Heights also has some prestige to it. You see a lot of single family homes. And as we know, a majority of the homes in DC are row homes. If we compare that to Shaw, we can see Shaw is around multiple different metro stops, right? So this is the Shaw Metro station, and this one right here, I'm not too sure what that metro is, but it's surrounded by at least 1, 2, and 3. And as you can see, we just have a bunch of metro stops all around here. These aren't directly for the Shaw neighborhood, but you can tell the difference if we compare that to 16th Street Heights, right? So not a lot of metro stops surrounding the immediate area, right? Let's talk about 16th Street Heights, right? So 16th Street Heights, the average home value, the median home value is $860,000. The population is a small population, so only 3,700 people live in that neighborhood, and 23% of people rent their homes, and the other 77% own their homes. The median household income is right around $160,000, and it is ranked 20 out of 107 for most diverse neighborhoods in DC. It's ranked 33 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to raise a family in DC, and it's ranked 50 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to live in DC. And all these rankings are based off niche.com. Let's talk about Shaw. Shaw, the vibe in this neighborhood is, again, a lot of young professionals are attracted to this neighborhood. Now, Shaw is one of those neighborhoods that have undergone a lot of new development with new condos, new apartments, new businesses investing in the neighborhood over the past, I would say, decade and change, maybe decade and 2 to 5 years. This neighborhood is completely transformed. Shaw has a lot of history to it. It's the home of Howard University, which is, I think, one of the top HBCUs in the country. Shaw is the home to that university. You can call it a university town, but if a university is located in that neighborhood, you pretty much know what the overall vibe is going to be. If you owned investment property in Shaw, those investment properties could be rented out pretty easily, just because you might have students who don't want to live on campus and they want to take advantage of off-campus housing. right? A lot of Airbnbs are in Shaw. So people who wanted to rent their homes out on Airbnbs, that's a very lucrative market because Shaw is has a very central location. It's only like 7 or 8 minutes from downtown, which is over here, Mount Vernon Triangle. This is like the whole downtown area, Penn Quarter. Very accessible neighborhood if we compare it to 16th Street Heights. So let's look at what niche.com has to say about Shaw. Shaw has an overall niche grade of an A. The population in Shaw is 4,000. The median home value is 633,000. Median rent is 2,100. So Shaw is pretty expensive when it comes to rents, and 74% of homes in Shaw are occupied by renters. Now, this number is skewed just because you have a lot of new modern apartments in Shaw. You see majority of the population in Shaw, they're going to be renters, right? And the other 26%, they do own. Shaw is rated 25 out of 107 for best neighborhoods for young professionals in DC. It's rated 29 out of 107 for most diverse neighborhood in DC. And lastly, it's ranked 42 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to live in Washington, D.C. Let's move over to the northeast quadrant of D.C. Now, let's look at two neighborhoods, two popular ones. Let's look at NOMA. So NOMA, all that stands for is North of Massachusetts Avenue. And let's look at Woodridge. Before I even delve deep into the differences between these two neighborhoods, you can probably already tell NOMA is the more walkable neighborhood because you can see it's surrounded by multiple metro stations. And Woodridge, not a lot of metro stations around. The closest one is the Brookland Metro Station right by the Catholic University. And from Woodridge to this metro, you might have to drive if you didn't want to walk, but I mean, it's probably a 7 or 8 minute drive tops. Now let's talk about Woodridge. Woodridge is one of those neighborhoods that, again, gives you that very suburban feel in the city, right? If you didn't want to live in the suburbs of Maryland or Virginia, you wanted to live in DC because you work in DC and you don't want to do a whole bunch of commuting. So Woodridge might be a good fit if you wanted some kind of suburban living while still living in the city. So if we compare that to NOMA, complete opposite. NOMA, very walkable. So NOMA, I would compare it to Shaw in a sense. I mean, it does have its own vibe, but same trends. A lot of new construction going on, especially around the H Street corridor, which starts from right around here. This is the entire H Street corridor. And man, I tell you, H Street corridor has seen, and it's still continuing to see, a lot of new developments. So apartments, condos, renovations of older homes. A lot of new businesses are coming into H Street. H Street is one of those neighborhoods in the next three at a minimum, 3 to 5, 6, 7 years, that you're probably not going to recognize that neighborhood because it's just going through so much change and development. If you were looking to live in NOMA, looking along the H Street corridor, you might see a few options for new condos if you wanted to be right in the middle of all the action and take advantage of all that stuff. So just comparing that to Woodridge over here, again, like I said, there's nothing wrong either. It just depends on where you're at in life, right? Which one of these neighborhoods might make the most sense for your current position in life. Let's look at a few stats on Woodridge. Woodridge has an overall niche grade of B according to niche.com, has a slightly higher population than the other neighborhoods we've talked about in the past, which is around 8,100. The median home value according to niche.com is 540,000, which I think might be a little off because in Woodridge, if you saw a $540,000 home in Woodridge, it's most likely going to need some kind of renovation, right? So I would argue that number is a bit off. I would say it's probably $150,000 higher. So I would put the average home value in Woodridge at around maybe $700,000. It even has here that the median rent is $640,000. And I think that's just wishful thinking because there's no neighborhood in DC where the median rent is $640,000. So that might be a little off. Woodridge is ranked, according to niche.com, 14 out of 107 for most diverse neighborhoods in DC, is ranked 60 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to live in DC, and it's ranked 63 out of 107 for best neighborhoods in DC to raise a family. 66% of the population in Woodridge are owners, and the other 34% are renters. Woodridge has an overall walk score of fifth in the 50s. And again, not the most walkable neighborhood. However, it could be worse. It could be 20, it could be 30. But for a suburban style neighborhood with a walk score of 50, not that bad. It's not in the 90s like Shaw or any one of those neighborhoods, but it's still somewhat walkable. Let's look at Noma. Noma has an overall, according to niche.com, has an overall niche grade of an A. The population is right around 4,000. Median rent is $2,300. Where you see a lot of these dense urban neighborhoods, you tend to see the rent prices are a bit higher because most of the population in these neighborhoods rent. So that's why we see that $2,300 median rent price tag. Median home value is $750,000, and 38% of residents rent and 62% of residents own. Not sure how accurate that is, but I would argue that in Noma, majority of the population are renters compared to owners. But I guess that's how niche.com feels. Noma is rated 21 out of 107 for best neighborhoods for young professionals in DC. It's rated 38 out of 107 for most diverse neighborhoods in DC. And it's rated 42 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to raise a family in Washington, DC. Let's look at two other neighborhoods in the northeast quadrant of DC. So let's look at Brookland, which is not too far from Woodridge, and Trinidad, which is not too far from Noma. So again, these two neighborhoods, very different neighborhoods. Now, Brookland has more of that. How do I describe Brookland? It's kind of similar to Woodridge. It's more of a suburban neighborhood. So you do see a lot of single family homes. There's quite a little bit more of amenities in Brookland compared to Woodridge, because Brookland, we've seen quite a bit of development going on. It's the home of Catholic University, which is, again, one of the top universities in DC and in the country. And Brookland just gives you that small town feel, right? It's kind of very community oriented, there's always events going on for the neighbors, and just, it's just one of those neighborhoods where everyone just wants to feel involved, in their neighborhood and in their community. If we compare that to Trinidad is not too far from the 8th Street corridor. I can't find Trinidad on the map. I think I lost it. But anyway, Trinidad, different vibes. It's a little bit more urban. You do have a lot of things to do, amenities, definitely more walkable than Brookland. So it's right off the 8th Street corridor. So it's right around that vicinity of a lot of new development going on. It's one of those neighborhoods in DC that's also experienced a lot of change in the past decade or so. Property values over there have risen tremendously from when I first moved to DC more than a decade ago. Definitely a different vibe than Brookland. Let's look up a few stats about Brookland. According to niche.com, Brookland has an overall grade score of B. It has a population of around 7,200. Median home values are $660,000, which I think is more. And median rents are $1,300. 32% of residents rent, and the other 68% own. Brookland is ranked 11 out of 107 for most diverse neighborhoods in DC. It's ranked 54 out of 107 for best neighborhoods for young professionals in DC. And it's ranked 54 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to raise a family in Washington, DC, according to niche.com. Brookland has a walk score of 74. Even though it borders the neighborhood of Woodridge, which is also kind of a suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a lot of single-family homes, it's a more walkable neighborhood than Woodridge, which Woodridge is the walk score is in the 50s. Now we're comparing Brookland and Trinidad. So let's look at what Trinidad has. Trinidad has a walk score of 78. And according to niche.com, it has an overall grade of B, has a population of 7,100. The median home value is $578,000. 56% of the population are renters and 44% are homeowners. Again, we're seeing the trend. Same quadrant, different neighborhoods, they have different things to offer. So whatever your goals are, you have to look for the neighborhood that will be the best fit. Let's move over to the southeast quadrant of DC, which is right around here. So we're going to be comparing the neighborhood of Hillcrest and Capitol Hill. These two neighborhoods in the southeastern part of DC. Now, Hillcrest, let's talk about Hillcrest for a second. Hillcrest is gives you, again, that very, very suburban vibe. Not the most walkable neighborhood, not a lot of nightlife and amenities. With the demographic in Hillcrest, you're going to see families and people who've lived in the neighborhood and owned their homes for the past decade, 2, 3, 4 decades even. Now, Capitol Hill, this is where the United States Capitol is located, obviously. Home prices, they go as high as $1.82 million. Again, very walkable. You can see it has many metro stops around it. And in Hillcrest, we don't see a lot, right? So not surrounded by a lot of metro stops, not as walkable. If you wanted to go to the groceries or anything, you probably will have to get in the car. And also the property values kind of differ greatly. According to niche.com, Capitol Hill has a population of 8,000. The median home values in Capitol Hill are 830,000. The median rent is 2,100. 41% of the population rent, and the other 59% own their homes. Capitol Hill has a walk score of 84, a transit score of 77, and a biker score of 98. Very walkable, very bikeable, and it's located conveniently around multiple different metro and bus stops. Now let's head over to Hillcrest over here. Let's see what niche.com has to say about Hillcrest. According to niche.com, Hillcrest has an overall grade of a C. It's a tiny neighborhood, so only a population of 2,000 people. Median home values are around 470,000. So it's half the amount of Capitol Hill, even though these two neighborhoods are in the southeast quadrant of DC. Median rent in Capitol Hill is right around $1,500, and 49% of residents rent and 51% are homeowners. Hillcrest has a walk score of 54, a transit score of 62, and a bike score of 24. So not the most bikeable neighborhood. But you do have a couple of bus stops in the neighborhood if you wanted to get around. And Hillcrest has a lot of greenery too. Last but not least, let's head over to Southwest Washington now. There's really nothing for me to compare Southwest Washington to, because basically all the neighborhoods in Southwest Washington are the same, because it's such a tiny, tiny, tiny neighborhood. Let's head over here. As we can see, this is the Southwest Waterfront, which is located right here on the border. This is the Southwest Waterfront and Southwest Washington. You can see they're right beside each other. This is the home of the Washington Nats Stadium. So they're the professional baseball team for DC. The stadium is right here at Nationals Park. And right across the street, we have the Audi Field, which is the home for DC's professional soccer teams, DC United. Overall, just this entire location, this is just prime location right here. The neighborhood has undergone massive, massive development. You have condos selling in this neighborhood for as high as $8 million. You know, that doesn't mean you can't find cheaper options, because I tell people all the time, you can live in Southwest Waterfront for as little as, not directly on the water, but in the neighborhood. You could live there for as little as $350K if you were looking to buy a 1-bedroom condo. According to niche.com, the population of Southwest Waterfront, to be more specific, is approximately 4,400. The median home value is 690,000, and 68% of the residents rent and 32% of the residents own. Southwest is ranked 12 out of 107 for best neighborhoods for young professionals. It's ranked 21 out of 107 for most diverse neighborhoods in DC, and 22 out of 107 for best neighborhoods to live in Washington, DC. And it has a 98 walk score. Very, very, very walkable neighborhood. As you can see on the map, you have everything in this neighborhood. You have the museum, which is right here. You have Nationals Park. You have, Titanic Memorial. There's also the Arena State. So if you're into like concerts and stuff like that, art plays, hey, you have options in a Continental Hotel. And then you also have Southwest Waterfront right here. You have a lot of amenities along the strip, restaurants, just a whole bunch of stuff. And then you also have Whole Foods, which is not too far away if you want to do your grocery shopping, which is right here, right? You have a lot of very walkable neighborhood. Has a biker's score of 92. So you can also bike quite around the neighborhood quite conveniently. And as you can see, we have many different metro stops. We have the Navy Yards metro stop right there. And we have I'm pretty sure we have some others. I might have to zoom out the map, but according to walkscore.com, it has a score of 100 for transit. So Very accessible neighborhood. So there you have it. I hope that brief explanation of the different quadrants of DC and the different neighborhoods in those quadrants was helpful. You can have an idea of which one of these Washington, DC neighborhoods you can see yourself buying your first or second home in, or you can see yourself living in. Now, if you're out of state and you've never been to any of these neighborhoods and you wanted to see what they look like in person, feel free to look at my other videos. I have different neighborhood tours of Woodridge, Capitol Hill, Petworth, Columbia Heights. Feel free to check out those videos. In those videos, I go over, what these neighborhoods look like. I show you different amenities in the neighborhoods, different homes at different price ranges. Remember, it doesn't matter if you're moving to the DC area in 10 or 100 days. Feel free to reach out, call, text, or email. We'll be glad to help you make that smooth move, and I'll see you in the next neighborhood.